when it rolls out from the descent
government. And they enable policymakers, businesses, analysts, researchers, and many more to assess and measure trends about who we are and where we're going as a society. And supporting all of these diverse uses of census data requires us to publish an enormous amount of statistics and data tables, often at very fine levels of detail or granularity. And unfortunately, we know that every time you're going to publish or release any statistic that's calculated from a confidential data source, you are going to reveal or leak a tiny bit of private information in the process. Back in 2003, in what later became known as the database reconstruction theorem, academics demonstrated mathematically that if you release too many statistics at too high a degree of accuracy, then eventually you're going to reveal the entire underlying confidential data source from which those statistics were calculated. And this challenge is even greater when you consider these new and emerging privacy threats that we're facing today. It's long been said that nothing on the internet ever goes away, and the same is definitely true for data that get published or that are available externally. Over the last 20 to 30 years, we've seen an incredible proliferation in third-party data sources that could be used to re-identify individuals in publicly released official statistics. Data about us are collected all the time by the companies and businesses we interact with, by data brokers, through social media, and so on. And these data often include very rich information about each and every one of us, and they could be used in an attempt to pick out specific individuals in published official statistics. Meanwhile, computer technology and machine learning algorithms have improved substantially. Computers can now easily perform the kind of complex matching algorithms that would be necessary to leverage that external data in order to re-identify individuals or to attempt to re-identify individuals in published statistics. And these parallel trends aren't just abstract concerns. They represent real concrete threats to protecting confidentiality that need to be addressed. Over the past century, the Census Bureau has been a world leader in the design and implementation of statistical methods to safeguard privacy in our public data releases. And as new privacy threats have been identified over the years, the Census Bureau has worked diligently to improve and strengthen the statistical safeguards that we use to mitigate those threats. Our adoption of formal privacy or differential privacy for the 2020 census is merely the latest in a long history of this innovation and continuous improvement to our privacy protections. And it's a necessary one to counter the 21st century privacy threats that I just mentioned. So there's a common misperception that aggregating data, publishing data as aggregate data tables, is sufficient to protect privacy. And while that may have once been the case and may still be true for some limited or smaller data releases, it's not sufficient to protect privacy in large-scale statistical data products. In fact, aggregate tabular data can often be thought of like a giant game of Sudoku, for those of you who play Sudoku. With Sudoku, if you have enough numbers pre-populated into the grid of the puzzle, then eventually there's one and only one solution to that puzzle. Well, the same is true or can be thought of as true for data tables. When you publish enough data tables that aggregate and disaggregate the data by various characteristics, well, eventually there's going to be one and only one set of individual level records that could have produced all of those aggregate tabular data. And while it may have seemed unthinkable a decade ago for computers to do this, these machine learning algorithms and optimization algorithms can now perform these reconstructions of individual level data from aggregate data tables relatively easily. So let's look at a simple example here. Imagine that you collected some basic demographic information about the 7 people who lived on a particular census block. You then publish some aggregate descriptive statistics about those 7 individuals. How many were female? How many were black? What's the median age of married individuals? And so on. Well, with those basic tabular statistics, It's a trivial matter to solve for the only set of individual level records that could have yielded those results. And I really mean trivial in this context. It took a 2013 MacBook Pro all of 0.2 seconds to solve for those individual level records from those aggregate tabular data. And now our would-be attacker would have individual level records for everyone on that block, just missing name. The question is, can this attacker actually re-identify any of them? Well, it turns out that this is also a relatively trivial exercise. While the reconstructed individual level records didn't have names attached to them, they did have a number of pseudo-identifiers that could be used to link to an outside data source that does have names. In this particular example, the attacker could use age and sex to match the reconstructed individual level records to third-party data, say, for example, voter registration lists for that block. Now it's easy to attach names to the records, and you've just learned Jane, Joe, and John's race and relationship status. And those are two variables that are included on the census that most third-party commercial data don't have. So with the risks of reconstruction and re-identification attacks, these examples I just showed in mind, and the knowledge that these types of attacks are getting easier and easier to perform, the Census Bureau decided to do some research to see how vulnerable the privacy protection methods that we've used for previous censuses would be to these types of attacks. So remember, I mentioned a few minutes ago that that database reconstruction theorem tells us that anytime you release any calculation or tabulation that's derived from a confidential data source, you're going to reveal or leak a tiny amount of private information in the process. Well, the 2010 census collected a handful of attributes for the, at the time, approximately 309 million people in the United States. That gave us about 1.9 billion confidential data points that we had to protect. But from those 1.9 billion confidential data points, the 2010 census data products released over 150 billion aggregate statistics that were derived from those data. So with the knowledge that each time you release one of those statistics calculated from a confidential data source, you're going to leak a little bit of information, we wanted to see, were those 150 billion statistics enough to allow an attacker to reconstruct and re-identify individuals from the 2010 census? Well, unfortunately, the results were an emphatic yes, they were. In fact, using only a small portion of the publicly released 2010 data, Census Bureau researchers were able to accurately reconstruct individual level records for all the inhabitants of all 6 million inhabited blocks in the United States. Moreover, we were able to reconstruct detailed individual level information, including sex, age plus or minus 1 year, race, and ethnicity for 71% of the entire U.S. population. And then linking those reconstructed individual level records to commercially available data from the 2010 period, we were able to confirm that we had accurately re-identified those individuals on all variables for 52 million people. So it should go without saying that the results of these internal experiments were a real eye-opener for us. And recognizing the growing threat posed by these incredibly powerful machine learning algorithms and this proliferation of external data, we realized that our traditional approaches to protecting privacy in our public data products were increasingly insufficient to meet these new threats. So to meet our continuing obligations to safeguard respondent information, the Census Bureau has committed to modernizing our approaches to privacy protection, and we've decided to adopt differential privacy for the 2020 census. So what is differential privacy? Differential privacy is a framework for quantifying the amount of privacy risk for each calculation, data table, or data product that you want to release, no matter what third-party data is available to use in a re-identification attack, and now or at any point in the future. Said slightly differently, differential privacy as an approach allows you to precisely measure and then mitigate that leakage of private information in your published statistics. And by quantifying, by measuring that risk, it allows you to then inject precisely calibrated amounts of statistically neutral noise or uncertainty into those statistics that you're going to release to make sure that you've decreased that privacy risk to an acceptable range, acceptable threshold. But what constitutes an acceptable level of privacy risk? That's the key question. Well, the only way that you could absolutely eliminate all risk of re-identification in data products that you want to publish would be to never publish any usable data at all. And clearly, as our mission is to be the leading provider of quality statistics, releasing no usable data would not be a viable option for us. So instead, policymakers have to find this optimal balance wherein we're providing data that are sufficiently accurate to meet our data users' needs, while also being sufficiently noisy to meet our legal and ethical obligations to safeguard those data. And finding this balance is a difficult decision, but it's ultimately a policy choice, not a technical one. That said, once you've identified that point on the spectrum between perfect privacy and no useful data on the one side, or perfectly accurate data with no privacy protections on the other, once you find that sweet spot in between those two extremes, that point becomes known as your privacy loss budget. And you'll often see this represented by the Greek letter epsilon. And much like a monetary budget, the lower your privacy loss budget, the less privacy you're willing to give up. So an epsilon of 0 would be the world of perfect privacy with completely useless data. And an epsilon of infinity would be the world of perfect data with no privacy protections at all. Now, there are a lot of folks who, particularly when we first announced our adoption of formal privacy for the 2020 census, they said, oh, differential privacy will destroy the usability of census data compared to the traditional privacy protection techniques that we've used for past censuses. And I want to be very clear that when comparing differential privacy with traditional disclosure avoidance techniques, neither approach is inherently any better than the other from the perspective of data accuracy. It's all going to depend on how you implement those methods and the parameters that you use in that implementation. I've seen some implementations of differential privacy that result in highly accurate data when they're well designed and when they have sufficiently high privacy loss budgets. And I've seen some, actually quite a few, implementations of traditional disclosure avoidance techniques that have resulted in terrible data quality when they were poorly designed or when they had particularly high record swapping rates or cell suppression thresholds, for example. Where differential privacy and traditional privacy protection techniques do substantially differ is on the privacy front. Traditional disclosure avoidance techniques were often ad hoc in nature and had little, if any, ability to quantify just how strong those protections were. Formal privacy provides you that framework for precisely quantifying privacy risk, and that quantification is future-proof. You don't have to make assumptions about what third-party data attackers might have 1 year, 2 years, 5 years from now, or how much computer algorithms will improve over that time. So what does all this mean for the 2020 census? Well, I want to be clear that the Census Bureau's adoption of formal privacy for the 2020 census does not alter our constitutional mandate to apportion seats for the U.S. House of Representatives using the actual enumeration of state populations. For the 2020 census data products, we will be holding state population totals as invariant, meaning there will be no noise added to those numbers. The remaining data products, however, including the PL 94-171 redistricting data, will have privacy protections applied to them, as they have in prior censuses. Only this time, the noise will come from differential privacy rather than from the record swapping mechanisms that we used in the past. Now, our switch to differential privacy does require us to reevaluate the quantity of statistics and data tables that we're going to be releasing, as each additional statistic or table uses up a fraction of the overall privacy loss budget for the 2020 census. Consequently, our proposed suite of 2020 census data products will look somewhat different than in past decades. And if you want to learn more about these differences, there'll be a link at the end of my presentation today, or you can just search 2020 census data products on the census.gov website. So I mentioned before that the decision about where on that spectrum from perfect privacy to perfect accuracy you find that sweet spot, that's a policy decision. And that decision is going to be made by the Census Bureau's Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, or DSEP. And they're going to have to decide not just what the overall privacy loss budget for the 2020 census will be, but they'll also have to decide how to allocate the shares of that privacy loss budget to the various data products that we'll be producing. And this includes the various components of what we call the Group 1 data products, the PL 94-171 redistricting data, and the demographic and housing characteristics files. It also includes the Group 2 data products that include tabulations on detailed race, detailed ethnicity, and detailed tribal data, as well as detailed household characteristics. And then all of the out-year and additional data products that are generated from the decennial census. So they'll have to give shares of that overall privacy loss budget to each of these data products in turn. And again, I said that's a policy decision. But then even within those data products, there's also going to be an allocation of that privacy loss budget to the various tabulations that comprise each of those data products. And then here is just a sample allocation that allocates shares of the privacy loss budget to queries by geographic level, from the nation all the way down to the block, and by the query set, so essentially the different variables and cross-tabulations that are being calculated. So each of those gets a share of the privacy loss budget attached to that data product, and each of those data products shares some to the global privacy loss budget for the 2020 census. Now, these decisions have not yet been made, and they'll be made by DSEP in the coming months, but they will be factoring in input from you, our data users, in terms of what is the relative priority of, for example, tabulations at the county level versus those at the tract or block level. What is the relative priority of information on voting age by Hispanic origin and race versus detailed cross-tabulations that would support age by sex pyramids, for example. Now, I'm sure many of you know the Census Bureau's operational schedule has been in some flux recently, and particularly with the ongoing litigation that is occurring. We have had to compress our production schedules to meet our statutory deadlines. Currently, we're focusing all of our attention on identifying the activities and schedules that are needed to produce accurate and complete redistricting data by the March 31st, 2021 deadline, the statutory deadline there. As such, our recent planning and DAS development work has been focused on getting done for that PL statutory deadline. And so we've had to postpone work on the remaining data products and support for those remaining data products for the time being. We will, however, restart the planning and production, planning for production release of those other 2020 data products once we've completed the data planning and scheduling activities for the apportionment and redistricting products. So what have we been working on recently? What have our recent priorities been? Well, for starters, as we're moving closer and closer to production, we are hardening the system for integration testing into the larger 2020 census IT infrastructure, as well as preparing the system to be able to run in established timeframes for production. More importantly for your interests, I have a feeling, we have also been focusing a lot of our attention on improving the algorithm, improving the performance of the algorithm to bring the resulting data accuracy of the data products under the direct control of the privacy loss budget. For those of you who analyzed the 2010 demonstration products that we released last October, or the files that we released from the May DAS run or the most recent September DAS run, you'll have seen that even with the same privacy loss budget being expended, different mechanisms of the algorithm can produce changes in the resulting accuracy. We use the same privacy loss budget across all three of those files, but you will see widely different impacts on accuracy. One of the things we've been focusing on have been to bring the performance of the algorithm under the control of the privacy loss budget, so that as you tune that privacy loss budget, as you increase it, for example, that you will increase accuracy in direct proportion to how much you've increased the privacy loss budget assigned. So that's been a major focus of the DAS development work recently, and as those of you who have analyzed the September privacy protected microdata file and resulting tabulations that were released a couple of weeks ago, you'll notice that we've significantly increased accuracy for those data, even using the same privacy loss budget. We've also been focusing substantially on improving accuracy for population data for legal and political entities, particularly for American Indian and Alaska Native tribal areas and populations for legal and political entities that are in what we call off-spine geographies, those that don't follow the standard kind of state to county to tract to block group to block. So we've done a number of improvements. We've implemented a number of improvements to the algorithm to better target enhanced accuracy for those off-spine geographies as well. And then on the kind of IT security front, a major focus of ours has been ensuring the security of our random number generator. In order to inject the noise into the data, we have to pull trillions of random numbers from a distribution of noise values. The security of that noise injection depends on the security of the random number generator used, and we want to ensure that nobody could essentially undo our protections by undoing the security of those random numbers. So that's been a focus as well. So as I mentioned a moment ago, we recently released new demonstration data. It was the demonstration privacy protected microdata files of September 17th, as well as detailed summary metrics calculating various measures of accuracy across the data that were produced in that file. Now, consistent with our retooling of the schedule to focus on preparation of the redistricting data by the statutory deadlines, those new demonstration data products are limited to just the data necessary to support the release of the redistricting file. That would be tables P1 through PH and H1. In addition to the files and metrics that we released, IPPMS has also tabulated those data for data users that want to go in and look at tabulations of those for their particular data use cases. Again, as I mentioned, across all of the releases of our demonstration data products, we've been so far keeping the privacy loss budget consistent across those releases so that our data users can assess improvements to the algorithm itself, not changes in the privacy loss budget. Again, if you increase the privacy loss budget, you'll get greater accuracy. If you decrease it, you'll get more noise. We wanted to show improvements to the performance of the algorithm and accuracy improvements that come essentially without any cost. They don't affect the privacy guarantee. They're improvements just in how the algorithm performs. And so we used privacy loss budget, as we have for the prior releases, of an epsilon of 4 for the PPMF person file, and an epsilon of 0.5 for the PPMF unit run. Again, that is limited to just the H1 table, so the epsilon of 0.5 would be consistent with how much was spent in the prior demonstration data on the broader PPMF unit tabulations that had been scaled back for this particular run with the focus just on the PL data. So what are some of the major changes to the disclosure avoidance system that are included and represented in this new PPMF release, these new demonstration data? Well, for starters, we brought American Indian, Alaska Native tribal areas directly onto the processing geographic hierarchy, onto the spine. We also included a new state-level American Indian and Alaska Native tribal area population invariant. So essentially, the total population for all AIN tribal areas within each state is held exactly as enumerated, and no noise is injected to that, much as we do for the state-level population totals as well. We made some substantial improvements to the rounder algorithm that's used within the system, and that's helped to decrease the post-processing errors that we noticed in prior versions of the demonstration data, again, improving accuracy as a result. We changed the noise distribution that we're using for the noise injection from the previously used geometric distribution to a new discrete Gaussian distribution. That has an impact of better clustering the noise values closer to zero, reducing the likelihood that noise values would be pulled from the tail ends of the distribution on either side. And finally, we made a number of stability and reliability enhancements to the algorithm to prepare us for production once we go into production mode. So how did the new demonstration data stack up to the prior demonstration data products that we've released? Well, so I mentioned earlier that one of our top priorities had been to improve the accuracy of population counts for legal and political entities. So these graphs here show the mean absolute error for counties across the entire country, broken down by county size. So for comparison, you can see the average error for the October 2019 demonstration data, as well as the average error for the May 27th privacy-protected microdata file that we released. Dark blue is the October 2019 data, light blue is the May 2020 data, and the burgundy is the new September 7th file that we just released. And as you can see, across counties of all different sizes, the average error was 82 people in the October 2019 data. By May, we had improved that so that average error was reduced down to only 16 people. And with the new PPMF, that error has been further reduced to just 6.7 people on average across all counties. That's a total of about a 92% decrease in average error for population counts at the county level since last year's demonstration data. And again, that's holding the overall privacy loss budget for the data product constant. Also important to note here is that is the average error across counties of different sizes. The October 2019 data had large disparities in average error across counties of different sizes. Now those error rates are quite uniform across the different size categories. But counties are entities directly on the geographic spine. So how did we do for off-spine geographies? Here is the mean absolute error for total population of incorporated places. Again, the dark blue is the October 2019 data, light blue is the May 2020 data, and burgundy is the September 2020 data. Across all incorporated places, average error was 85 people last October, which was improved to 55 people in May. And with the new PPMF, we've further reduced that to an average error of just 23 people across all incorporated places. Now, given that these incorporated places are off of the post-processing geographic spine, you'll see a little bit more dispersion in error rates across size categories, with the smallest error, roughly 17 people in the smallest places, those with a population of under 500 people, and slightly larger error, around 60 people, for the largest places, those incorporated places with a population of over 100,000. But still, compared to earlier versions of the algorithm, we've substantially addressed the distortion that we had noticed in those earlier runs. Lastly, one of our other priorities, as I mentioned, was to improve accuracy for American Indian and Alaska Native geographies. So here is the mean absolute error for total population of federal American Indian reservations and off-reservation trust lands. Again, the light blue is the May data, and the burgundy is the recently released September run. Now, there's no comparison from the October demonstration data because those geographies were not included in that first set of metrics that we produced. But in the May data, the average error for American Indian reservations was 32.5 people. Bringing the AIAN tribal areas onto the processing spine, along with our other algorithmic improvements, we've reduced that from 32.5 people down to 6.5 people in the new demonstration data. And again, average error is pretty consistent across size categories, with even the biggest reservations only having an average error of about 10.25 individuals. Now, these are just a few of the metrics of interest. I encourage you to review the full suite of our demonstration, our detailed summary metrics, and look at those use cases and the error measures for those use cases that are most relevant for your particular uses of census data, and also to check out the tabulations that have been produced by IPMS. Let us know your reactions and tell us what you think tell us what you think our priorities should be for future improvements to the algorithm, because we want to make sure that we're addressing fitness for use concerns of our data users to the maximum extent that we can. So here is a rough schedule, and as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, our schedule is somewhat in flux, and I know that even since I put these slides together last week, I've been out on vacation for a week. I know these dates have now changed. It is likely that the DCEP decision-making meetings, both for setting the final list of invariants and system architecture, as well as the decision meeting for setting the privacy loss budget for the 2020 data products, those are likely being delayed as a result of changes to our operational schedule. We will be announcing more information on when those meetings will happen once the schedule has solidified more. But roughly speaking, there will be a DCEP decision meeting setting the invariants. We do intend to release additional demonstration data to support our users and to allow our users to inform the decision-making that DCEP is going to make about setting the privacy loss budget, and particularly about allocating that privacy loss budget across tabulations that support various use cases. And then, as I also mentioned, once that schedule is more firm, we'll be able to provide a more detailed schedule and the decision-making points that relate to the data products beyond the redistricting data file. So here are a couple useful links. We post regular updates on the work to the disclosure avoidance system on our website at this link here. We also have a dedicated email box for our 2020 census data products that's reviewed by our subject matter experts for the data products, as well as by our disclosure avoidance system team. So if, as you're looking through our demonstration data, you have feedback for us, if you have concerns, if you have suggestions for relative prioritization of accuracy for various use cases, or suggestions for thresholds of minimum fitness for use standards for tabulations at various levels of geography or various combinations of variables, please submit that to us. That will be enormously helpful to our policymakers when they are making those decisions about the privacy loss budget. You can send those to the 2020 DAS at census.gov email address here. For those of you who want to stay informed on all the latest updates, we also have a DAS newsletter that we send out information through. We won't spam you, I promise. We release information as it becomes available, and we target having new newsletter updates to our data users roughly every 2 weeks or so. So with that, I know we have some time left. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So Michael, we haven't received any in chat yet, so if anybody has a question, please go ahead and submit those. You just mentioned the newsletter. How does one sign up for the newsletter?
So I provided Barb LaFleur the direct link to sign up for the newsletter, as well as a link to where all of the archived issues of our newsletter are, and I believe she's going to be sending those out to everyone.
Okay, great. Yeah, I know that came up on the Washington meeting yesterday. All right, so nothing coming in on chat yet. So if anybody does have any questions for Michael while we've got him, please go ahead and submit those. And then, as Michael said, Barb will work with Charles to get that information to how to sign up for the newsletter in case you're interested.
And I'd like to thank Michael for his presentation once again. Good to know that the algorithm is being tweaked and that we're going to hopefully get better data than what we thought a year ago. So, of course, we are looking forward to getting the data next year. And wondering if anybody knows, is there any, we know that the census data collection period is going through October 31st, but are we still, is the Census Bureau still subject to the public law deadlines of December 31st and March 31st? Nothing has changed in that regard, has it?
So, as I said, I've been on vacation for a week, and I know these are subject to ongoing litigation, so I am probably not the most informed of what the current status of that litigation is. So I can't comment on the current schedule for collection and the statutory deadlines, but I'm sure as that gets clarified, it will be announced.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, Charles, this is Barbara. That's where I've been at too, is that we're waiting for clarification. We're still, running underneath the guises that we have been. So there has been no, I'm going to say etched in stone answer come down yet.
Right. Well, if anybody on the call here is curious about what we're talking about, the public law that the Census Bureau has been adhering to for the last several decades requires the total population of each state to be submitted to the president by December 31st of the census year. That's when we know how many seats in Congress each state will get. And then the block roll data is released by the end of March, again, according to the U.S. Code by March 31st. And although it sometimes comes as early as February, state by state in the past. So that's the data that states can use to hit the ground running for redistricting. And at one point, there was a recommendation to extend those deadlines, and that was included in a bill that the House passed, but the Senate and White House have not passed that bill, have not approved the extension of those deadlines. So that's the litigation that we're waiting for, and requires a change in the U.S. Code. And we're scheduled to commence the final session today, which is an Oregon update, hearing from our estimates program manager and myself and our